Welcome to Shaken and Disturbed, everybody. The hands are out. We're smashing those subscribe buttons. John, what are you doing? You're swimming?
We have, I don't know, I started flying, I think. We have an extra box in the
we have an extra box.
conversation.
Should I be doing this?
Yes, you should be doing this. This is a lesbian's dream to have an extra box. Welcome to Shaken and Disturbed. I'm Daryn Carp here with John Thrasher. And this extra box, this bonus box, if you will, is, I think we can say, a friend of mine. Friend of John's for sure.
Daryn and I certainly have a parasocial relationship.
Yes, we do. I've always wanted a parasocial relationship. The voice, the mellifluous voice that you're hearing is that of Caitlin Van Mol. Caitlin, welcome to Shaken and Disturbed. Thanks for being here.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm so excited to talk about myself as a Midwesterner for
we have questions for Midwesterners. Yeah, we've got questions for Midwesterners. But okay, so Caitlin is here talking about her podcast, Live to Tell, which is a super important, I think, topic of conversation, something that John and I like to talk about. We're big victims advocates here on Shaken and Disturbed. Obviously, we talk about Innocence Project. But John, you actually know Caitlin. I hate to say it because I hate to give you any sort of credit. You know her better than I do, okay? Even though she knows my voice. This is my first time I get to finally meet Caitlin. So why don't you tell us how you guys came to kind of come work together?
Yeah, why don't you back off? She's my friend first. Okay, we have a long history of friendship. Okay.
Smash my face, but also that subscribe button. See how you can
do both. If you're on YouTube, that's right.
If you're on YouTube.
Caitlin, I'm going to speak about you now as if you're not here. So I hope you don't mind. You can just kind of sit there and look gorgeous as you do, of course. Yes. Yeah, for those who are listening, you probably remember I used to work at A&E and Lifetime, and at A&E, Caitlin was the amazing, truly one of the most hardworking, devoted people I've ever worked with. Caitlin, you were the host of I Survived at A&E for like a couple years, year, 2, 3, 4.
Over the course of its life, I think it was like 4 or 5 years.
4 years. That's what I thought. Yeah. So I came in. So Caitlin, you worked at A&E before I was there. And then I came in to A&E, but they kept you on as the host because the show was so successful and it had such an audience. And
it actually, sorry to keep interrupting you.
No,
it actually premiered after I left A&E.
Oh, but you had recorded it.
I had started it while I worked there.
That's right. I'm remembering that now. Yes. Yeah. So I pop in and I'm like, hi, I'm the new guy that's going to be producing the show that Caitlin kind of already recorded. But yeah, so for my entire duration, Caitlin and I were talking on a weekly basis, and I can't say enough good things about you, Caitlin. We have both since moved away from A&E, and you have launched your own show that's in a similar format, which, by the way, Daryn and I can relate to, having left Oxygen and done the same thing.
Yes.
So we'll get to all of it. Is hard to do, and we'll get to sort of, how you start a podcast from scratch, because that alone is an interesting kind of thing. But so now you're doing Live to Tell, which if you guys aren't following and subscribed to, you need to stop what you're doing and go listen to it. Caitlin, we're going to get to a lot of questions. We have a lot of thoughts, but let's set up right away. What drew you to wanting to even do this type of show? I Survived is a different show, but Live to Tell, you're still telling survivor stories. And maybe tell the listeners, what is your show exactly? How would you describe it?
Yeah, so Live to Tell is a true crime show, but also sprinkles in some other non-true crime content about people who have been through some really crazy shit, like brink of death stuff. And then a lot of the tellings of these stories on different true crime podcasts or documentaries are and then they were rescued and they went to the hospital and they were fine.
Right.
But survival continues. You still have to live your life after a life-changing experience like this. So we also talk about, it's just me.
But it was us. It was us at one point.
It was us.
That's right.
I talk to people about all the aftermath. So physical healing, emotional heling, with therapy, priests, just the Lord sometimes is healing. If there's a court case, if they're dealing with PTSD, how this has affected their relationships, their work, their finances, because, you get hurt real bad, your hospital bills are going to be insane.
Yeah.
So all that kind of stuff is in the episode. And of course,
Nice.
what happened to them. That was very bad.
Right.
Sometimes I hear about, and this might just be like sensationalized, but sometimes you read about things in the news, and specifically for survivors, is it bad to call them victims? Like, do they view themselves as victims, or is really they want to be thought of as survivors? Because I think sometimes those are interchangeable, but they are two very different terms at the same time. And I'm just kind of wondering, I've heard people be like, I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor. And is that like a hard and fast rule that you're finding with people that you interview, or is it really personal?
I think with any words or, with people, if they have a preference, it's survivor, but some people don't really care, to be honest. They're just like, I'm thinking of Johan, who was attacked by a bear. I don't think he really cares if he's a victim or survivor.
He's just happy to be alive,
Yeah,
Yes.
he's just happy to be alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some people don't, but like it's kind of one of those things where you err on the side of survivor.
Yeah.
And something that we kind of always get asked, at least for John and I'm sure you get asked this too, is like, what made you be into true crime? What was the case that what happened to you? Who hurt you enough to kind of do this? And I'm wondering for you, however personal or not you want to get, what kind of, John kind of hit it up top, but what really like sparked your interest in survivor stories?
I mean, working at A&E and having access to a show like I Survived. I mean, we were starting to develop podcasts. My very good friend and colleague, McKamey Lynn, was kind of spearheading that, and worked on Cold Case for a long time.
My former boss, lovely human. Yes.
Lovely human. And I was like, I worked in video at the time, and I kind of wanted to dip my toesies into podcasting.
I like that. My toesies.
My little toesies.
Yeah.
And that was one of the shows. And I thought there was a lot of content there and there that was different from what we were seeing at the time.
Yeah.
Because it was very, murder, which is everyone's interested in. There is always a space for murder, but there wasn't a lot that I was seeing that was about survivors. So I thought that was a good niche to wiggle into.
It's interesting you say that, because John and I will sometimes say, like, everyone knows Ted Bundy's name, but you don't necessarily know the victim of Ted Bundy's names at all.
Exactly.
And so we try to not to glorify. It's hard to not mention Jeffrey Dahmer, things like that. It's hard not to say that term, but a lot of people don't know victims' names. So I think it's interesting that you're kind of taking it on its head and being like, no, we're going to focus on this. So.
Yeah. And that's like in the Live to Tell episodes are all titled with the first names of the survivors or the guests.
That's smart.
And then a crazy quote about a bear ripped off my head.
I was just going to say, that was one of the things that was surprising to me when I started working on the A&E show. And I think you're continuing to do this, it sounds like, with Live to Tell, which is a far better show, you guys, by the way. Just throwing it out there. Is that, it's not always a murder, or it's not even always like a crime. It sometimes is a bear attack. And those stories are just as, if not in some ways even more compelling, because this is just like a random attack by a shark. Or, I know we had touched on an episode when we were at A&E where I believe someone was like out to sea and like a shark was about to bite. And I'm like, it was one of the most compelling episodes that we worked on, because you hear this person's voice. And I believe even in that episode, Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, you interviewed that person, or if not that episode,
that's every episode I interviewed the survivor. That was Tamara.
That's right. Yes.
She and some friends went on a boat. The boat had a leak. They basically had to stay out there. I'm so sorry. There's a siren.
No, I don't hear it. You're good.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah. Never mind. What siren?
You survived the siren.
We survived. Look at that.
Boat sank, so they had to swim for shore. And one of the group didn't make it, unfortunately. But she swam for I think like 7 hours.
Crazy.
And three of them swam that long back and survived.
And how do you approach, with Live to Tell, how do you approach, a traditional true crime show, or I mean, a true crime story in the sense of like a murder or an attack of some kind versus, sometimes, there's another one I remember, a tornado, and people which is, by the way, what is happening? There are tornadoes everywhere right now. I'm on TikTok. We've got one in Florida. We got one in Ohio. We got one in Wisconsin, 3 here in Pittsburgh in the last 3 weeks. Anyway, climate change is happening, you guys. But do you approach these differently, these stories, like in how you tell them and talk to the survivors differently?
Yeah. I usually do like a pre-call with them just to explain that I'm like real, like how it's all gonna work. Yeah, I'm not a bot.
Yeah.
And
You're
I
not
can
AI.
usually get a feel for how they're gonna be. I always am like a very like, here's some jokes, please like me.
Yeah.
You're gonna laugh.
That's a good producer in you. Yeah, that's the good producer.
And sometimes it doesn't go well. And then you pivot and you just have to like, this is not about getting them to like you. This is about them telling their story.
Yeah.
And you go from there. I mean, I've interviewed so many different people.
Right.
Not just like for this podcast, but just across my career.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know how to pivot from a bad,
right.
Not that there have been like bad situations, but just ones where I'm like, they're not entertained by me.
Right.
Or there might be situations I'm sure that you've come across, whether or not you've aired these episodes or not, at least talk to people where like, maybe it could have been prevented had they not done something. Like, how many of these stories are they putting themselves into these situations? And I'm not saying that doesn't deserve empathy, but like, maybe don't go out camping in a woods filled with bears by yourself with all this food around you or something. Like, how much of it is sometimes brought on by them? And does that change the way that you might kind of approach them because they're sort of victims of their own circumstance as opposed to being like something happened to them. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't think that's come up so much. I mean, unfortunately, the one that springs to mind was a domestic violence situation. And we did talk about, because she is very I knew this from other interviews that she's done and talking with her previously, that she was like, look, I know people don't want to ask like, why didn't you leave? That's not like a good question to ask domestic violence survivors. But like, she was very clear that I don't want to take responsibility because like, it's not her responsibility what happened at all. But she was like, I did
it's not her fault, but but it could be like her responsibility for her actions, but that doesn't mean that she wanted the violence to happen.
Exactly.
But I do think there is a lot of psychological stuff with that. Did you watch Baby Reindeer? John has not, but okay. So with that, okay. So I don't want to give too much away to our audience because I know that John and I are going to talk about it, but like, spoiler alert, he has some sort of relationship with his stalker that he claims, and he says, this is a sort of a bad situation, but he's also enabling the situation to an extent, and so it's a little bit complicated. He obviously, there's a couple drug episodes. I don't want to spoil anything, but I know you know what I'm talking about, where he puts himself into these situations. And I don't think it's ever good to ask a domestic violent person like why you went back, because there's so much childhood trauma. There's so many cycles. People do things that aren't right for them all the time, and they know better, and they're still going to do it for whatever reason, because sometimes being uncomfortable feels better that's comfortable because that's how they grew up,
then like abandonment or neglect or something.
Right. They're not having anybody, at least if he's beating me, he's paying attention to me sometimes,
and in this situation, she was like, he was so good to her the first few weeks of their relationship.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, he says he's sorry. He's going to change back to that guy that I was dating. And that's why, I mean, she also, I don't think had a ton of resources,
right,
because they lived together. So I think that was also a factor. There's a lot of different reasons, but she was very willing to talk about it, which
I think it's good, especially for women to be able to do that, because I think what I'm kind of noticing whether it's the Amber Heard Johnny Depp case or something even, certainly less privileged, Gabby Petito, or even less privileged than that, some minority group we never hear about in the South that no one cares about or something, or in Appalachia or something that we never hear about. But I think it's hard to people don't want to ask the question, why'd you go back? Why did you do that? Why did you marry this guy or have kids with this guy or anything? But because they're scared to ask those questions because that's not the right question. And then I think that we get a little paralyzed in not being able to talk about like, well, yes, she did go back, but let's talk about the reasons why someone would, as opposed to just not asking that question at all. And that's what I really like about your show is like, you're answering, I feel like, or at least you're getting clarity on the really hard questions that I think matter. There's so much nuance in human behavior that we just completely overlook because we're uncomfortable about asking the wrong things or blaming the victim. And we don't want to, most people, I feel like, don't actually want to do that.
And that's
right. No,
I agree with you, Daryn. And I was just going to say, that's one of the things I really love about your work, Caitlin, is that when I was, part of the show previously, that is a really hard line to walk, especially when it comes to domestic violence. Like, having an understanding of how the audience is going to hear what you're saying and how they're going to interpret that with that particular subject is very difficult. Daryn and I have walked that line as well, but you do such a great job of telling the story with the facts and understanding the emotion and everything that you just described. And I think that's one of your many talents that I've discovered over the years. While we're on the topic, you're so welcome. While we're on this topic, I was going to ask this later, but what are some, we've talked about a couple of episodes here that kind of stand out to you. Is there one or two that you could give us a brief little summary of that's up on your Live to Tell feed right now that listeners could go listen to and hear more that kind of have stuck out for you so far?
Yeah. Well, I already mentioned Johan and the bear attack. That's the only nature one I have right now, but I'm definitely have a few more interviews that are similar stories, but different stories, scheduled. So more nature stuff coming up. And he was such a sweet man. First of all, he like gets up at like 2 a.m. and goes running.
Oh God, these people.
I'm just going to bed. By the way, you say was a good man. I think you mean in terms of conversation you're talking about. Yes.
No, he's alive. Sure. He's alive and well.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Everyone, my best friend Margot listens to every episode before I put it out, and she's like, "Did he die?" I'm like, "No, Margot."
Well,
like you're like, I'm just talking about him in past tense.
Well, he's telling the story.
Right. He's in the show. That's him. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And like, not to bring it down, sorry to do this again, but he was the first interview I did after my mom passed away in August. And he was just like, we ended up talking about that for a good 15 minutes of just like, how hard it all is. And he was so comforting and just so sweet.
Aww.
And just the best man.
Yeah.
I mean, you touched on it, I think, a little bit sometimes with like the true crime podcast community in general. How I think sometimes people are like, oh my God, you have all these people and they're into the most macabre, weird, sometimes the worst parts of other people's lives that they want to focus on and solve it. And they're like, what's the community like? I'm like, you couldn't meet nicer people. Like, you really, like, you couldn't meet nicer people. And I think to some extent, when you have a tragedy or something really hard that you have to go through emotionally in your life, losing your mom, losing anybody in your life that's close to you, talking to a guy who survived a bear attack, under which like you really don't, the Venn diagram of those two things are just a touch different. But there is sort of this middle part of surviving something that you almost felt was unimaginable 5 minutes before it happened. And I think that's what makes the community so just nice. Like we all kind of relate in that like little tiny Venn diagram space. I feel like that's what you're kind of talking about here. And it's really touching and sweet.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the interest in true crime, and especially why a true crime fan skews more towards being typically a woman, is that like we're kind of raised and told that like all this bad stuff is going to happen to you because you're a woman.
Right.
So like we just want to look like right into the eye of the most horrible things that can happen to people and sort of mentally prepare ourselves.
Agreed.
For that. I don't know, Daryn, again, I think this is a very typical like middle school girl thing, but like, did you go through a period of reading like all the Holocaust books?
Like Mouse and
Yeah.
Frank Diary and all that stuff.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Like
I
Number of the
did.
Stars. And I think
Yes.
that's like
Elie
the
Wiesel's
precursor for all the true
probably.
crime stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, like, yeah, probably. I mean, I'm also half Jewish. I grew up culturally Jewish, so like that stuff was like in my family for a long time. We had gone to Holocaust museums and things like that,
Sure.
so I have known about that. But it's interesting that you kind of put two and two together with that,
Yeah.
either young high school or middle school.
Yeah. I mean, I'm like a Gentile
Interesting.
from Michigan. I did not know a Jewish person until I went to college. Like,
Wow.
we had I know, it was very rural.
I mean, probably
We
same
don't
with
have
me now that
horns.
you say
That's
that.
the good news. We don't
Yeah,
have horns.
hooray.
Yeah. Hooray. You know, we're good.
I mean, we weren't taught that at all, but it was just like I didn't have any of those like
Of course.
cultural reasons for being interested in like these horrible things. It's just what I was reading.
While we're talking about the podcasters of it all, I want to add also, yes, I think the you guys obviously both can speak to the female experience, and that definitely adds up for sure. I think also, you know, it's all the true crime podcasters and even producers that I've met that have to really focus on the story and develop the story. Like, all of them are very empathetic human beings in general. And I think to be successful at this, you do have to understand the consequences of it. And I don't know that every single person, even some listeners and fans of true crime, can do that. So I think that adds to what you were saying about that. On this topic, like continuing on like producing and just like finding the stories, how do you find stories? Like, what do you look for? Do you have certain things that you avoid? We of course, you know, traditionally look for things that are adjudicated just because we don't want any kind of issues with defamation. But like, how do you approach like your research and then eventually deciding on a story?
Yeah. I typically, as far as like what I don't want, I will never do a story where the dog is the villain.
That's right.
No,
I remember that being a note from you.
Dogs and animals aren't villains.
Now, what about cats? On my background, you see my
There's no cat
magic.
that's ever a villain ever, not once. Cat has never done anything wrong ever.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
I'm not
Caitlin.
opposed to it.
Wow.
I'm not opposed.
I don't think you hear about that as often, but
yeah, fair enough. But that's a good point. I remember getting that
like
note.
A bobcat or
I see. Yeah.
You know, some sort of wild cat.
Sure. Well, this thing is wild. Yeah. By the way,
I
my
love
cat
that
looks
you're
like
not-
a water buffalo, so I mean, it doesn't even count.
He is a water buffalo, but
He
I like
is.
that Caitlin is just being basically like admitting her biasy in the reporting. She's
Yes.
like, I'm going to avoid anything that makes dogs look bad, but cats are okay.
Cats
to
are
make
on
look
the
like
yeah,
villains.
cats
I'd
are on the
have to
table.
see the story.
Right.
All right. We'll see what happens. But continue. Sorry to interrupt
you.
And
I do try to avoid things that happen to children.
Right.
I do have an episode, Anthony, who was attacked as a child by his father. Horrible, awful. But when I was reading other interviews with him, and even, I mean, from now when he's like in his late 20s to even back then, he seemed so well adjusted and so to just like have like processed it and moved on. And
to whatever degree,
Yes, exactly. So that was kind of the exception, but I generally don't.
Yeah.
Because no one wants to hear things that happens.
I know. We've put trigger warnings at the top of our shows just because
it makes it especially hard. Or it's like a different kind of evil. You know, they always say that like in prison, like people will have murdered thousands of people, but the ones that get treated the worst are usually like pedophiles or something that happens to children, because I feel like even the worst of humanity agrees that like children are kind of off limits, you know, like
totally.
Even in The Wire, when they would talk about gang violence and drugs, they'd be like, nope, nothing happens on Sunday. Like Sunday's God's day. Like we do not mess around. We don't kill anybody on Sundays. And I was like, okay, so there's some decorum. I'm curious for you, Caitlin, as you kind of, not only your mom passing away in the midst of you doing these episodes, which I'm sure was its own thing that you kind of had to survive and overcome, clearly. Is there something in your recording with the interviews that you've had, like what's been the biggest like takeaway for you? Like what have you learned from doing all of this?
Yeah, that if something like this happens to you, the best thing that you can do is talk about it. It doesn't have to be with a therapist. It doesn't have to be your family. It can be anyone, public speaking,
a microphone
onto
YouTube. Right.
Yeah, like just the
And why is that? Sorry to interrupt you there.
I think, well, it's kind of like the more that you say it and you're kind of experiencing it in your head, the less power it has over you.
You take agency over it, maybe.
Yeah. And the more that you kind of examine it, the less you feel it every time. Is something, I mean, that's from I Survived interviews, that's from Live to Tell interviews, that's everyone that I've talked to.
Yeah, and you hear that in the episodes. There, I remember doing some notes on some episodes where people were thanking you for just like reaching out and talking to them. And it's like, sometimes I feel like, when you've been through a trauma like that, it's like a lot of people, everyone, we always say on this show, especially, like, everyone handles trauma differently. Like, whether you were the victim or, were the perpetrator, like, there's a trauma in perpetuating things as well. But, hearing people kind of be kind of released from maybe their own mental boundaries that they had, or maybe they were scared, like, if they start talking about it, it will unleash an avalanche of problems and feelings that they didn't want to feel. But I have to say, like, especially your voice, I want to talk about your podcast voice here in a second. You are so podcast voice. You have such a great timbre to your voice, and it's so calming and soothing. And I think that, we talked about how to be a great producer. I mean, this is I'm like celebrating Caitlin, if you can't tell at this point.
I'm very uncomfortable.
No, I know. Sorry to do this.
Like doing that. He never celebrates me, Caitlin, so soak it all in.
Soak it all in. I don't celebrate people, only couple. But no, I was saying, like, I think that is a part of it. I think you sort of have that skill set of like letting people feel like they're comfortable with you. And that is a big part of it. Have you ever had an interview where they're like, okay, no, I've had enough. I want to stop this. I don't want this episode to go to air? Or has it just generally been a good conversation each time?
I've had a couple of people say, like, don't really want to talk about that, or I don't want that to go in the episode. And like, I always say, of course, this is your story. I'm not trying to be like sensationalist or anything. Like,
totally.
If you don't want it in it, then it's not going to go in. I don't know why, but I love these uncomfortable conversations. I love them. So I love digging into stuff that's like hard, which is so strange because I was raised like in the Midwest by Southerners who are like, don't talk about anything.
Right. Have no emotion and just be proper.
No emotion. Sorry, this is like a weird tangent, but this is a very good illustration. My dad was once telling me that his aunt, like he went to visit and she had her leg amputated. And he was like, I think it was from diabetes. And I said, you think it's from diabetes? And he like, you didn't ask?
Right, like that'd be kind of a huge matzo ball hanging out there to be like, hey, by the way, you don't have a leg.
What's going on there? And he was like, no. Like, you didn't even like take your mom aside later. I was like, hey, what happened to Aunt Carney?
So many families like that, though.
I know. It's true.
So many families. I'm like, my family, it's like, if you have like a new freckle, something like, how'd you get that? What's going on? What's going on? How long have it's not like, they will fucking pry. You know what I mean? Like, you sound a little bit off, like, what's going on there? Like, and then there's, some cultures, that they're just like, you could literally, have half a leg and people are like, no, it's just a normal day.
It's fine.
Don't want to bring anything uncomfortable. This makes sense for your childhood trauma is you digging into other people's hard shit, Caitlin, and figuring out what the hell is going on with them.
Yeah. I mean, small town stuff, gossip train all over the place. Not that I was a gossip.
Have you ever encountered somebody? Obviously, you do your research. Yes, obviously you do your research, and obviously you're interviewing survivors. But have you ever interviewed someone where you're like, is this how it went down? Is this the story?
Good
Is this
question.
a survivor? Are they, I often, I say this to John or I say this to my friends, like, we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. So if you see yourself as a survivor or a victim, it doesn't really matter what else happened around you. Everything happens to you. Do you deal with that? And how do you handle that?
Sometimes, well, not that they're like full out lying, because I, find
Sure.
newspaper reports and stuff that can confirm the basics.
Right,
but
right.
sometimes
You do your research.
they're like, because the court process can be so fraught and like
Right.
actually finding what feels like justice for these people is not always what happens. Sometimes I feel that some people exaggerate a little bit about, or aren't showing or telling the part of the story that they're, oh gosh, now see, I'm like,
telling their part
I
of the
don't
story,
want to
maybe,
say
but
that they're
not
bad.
No,
They're
I know
all
what you're
good
saying.
people.
Yes.
Just that like there are other circumstances in the legal
Right.
system that might lead to like what looks bad, like not prosecuting them for every single crime they committed, because sometimes that's part of the guilty
Right.
plea.
Sure.
Not really being the most informative to the survivors, stuff like that I'm like, well, but I can also understand like they can't tell you everything
Right.
because it's like an ongoing case at the time, but then also
Yeah.
like that sucks for you.
I mean,
Like,
this is why Baby
I would
Reindeer is
want
a
to
good
be,
example.
yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
like I would want to know everything that's going on, but like they can't necessarily always tell you.
Right.
So
Right.
it's stuff like
Right.
that where I'm like,
Yeah.
but like I also don't want to both sides it, and
Both sidism.
that's
No,
their
it's hard.
experience.
Would you ever?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Daryn.
I was just
gonna
gonna
jump in.
say stuff like that makes me like, I
It's
don't
icky.
know.
It feels really hard because like no one ever really knows. This is why we have a jury of, 12 of your peers because like and to some extent like this is why rape allegations are really hard specifically for sexual assault because a lot of times when they come to pass after 20 years, and people are like,
Yeah.
why didn't you say shit? Like, why didn't you say anything? And you're like, well, because at the time I felt a lot of shame or I didn't
Because
really
it
think to
took that
trust
long
anyone.
to feel right.
Because
Yeah.
but at the same time, on the flip side of that coin, you're like, but that now makes it so much harder to prosecute this because it ends up being a he said, she said. So it's like, I totally have empathy for someone who would never come forward. And I also want to encourage them to come forward because that's the best way we can talk about these things. Is the best way that we can solve that crime and get that person. So it's like, it's just uncomfortable, especially when you were not a victim of encouraging that. So I understand kind of the ickiness in there and that like little, pushback is what I'm saying.
I just had a quick question and we'll start to like kind of wrap this up here in a moment, but Caitlin, is there like a survivor that's maybe a high profile survivor out there that might be on like your bucket list of like people you would really love to talk to, or maybe not even high profile, just maybe somebody or story that you've heard that you would like to chat with?
Oh, I have a white whale.
Okay. Ooh. Which one? Tell us.
Well, I don't want to because I have had contact with them.
Okay.
But it might be, it's
okay.
tricky.
I get it. Yeah, I get it. All right. We won't mention it. We don't want to change the course of your potential path here.
Yes.
And mess anything up. But now we're going to speculate. Guys, if you guys are listening,
put in your guesses.
Put your guesses in the comments section. Let us know. Will you come back on our show and tell us eventually
if you do get the white whale?
Okay.
I mentioned this, but I actually do have to get your opinion on it because I do think it's a really good pop culture case. And we talk about pop culture. Did you watch Depp vs. Heard on Netflix at all? Or know about the case?
Did I watch what?
Depp vs. Heard, the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial.
Oh,
do you know about it?
It sounded like one long word, right? Depp vs. Heard. Depp vs. Heard.
I was like, I don't know.
And
what
he
these
told me not to
sounds
talk fast, but yes, no, that's just me being from New Jersey, and I apologize. Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard on Netflix.
I didn't watch it, but what I, felt from the things that the headlines, I'm like, whatever.
Sure.
I didn't really look that far into it, but like all the hate she got was
crazy, right?
was shocked.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I didn't know that Johnny Depp had that many fans in the year of our Lord, 2023.
2024.
3. Well, what
Oh,
was
and
happening
3.
in
You're right.
2023?
You're
Yes,
right.
came out
Fair
in
enough.
3. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Whatever. Yeah.
So that part was the Johnny Depp apologist part was astonishing to me. And to hear her, like, to not like go into much about the case, it was just a very saddening thing to watch. People online just have absolutely no empathy for someone. And like, I mean, I don't know what your opinions are. I'm like,
I actually didn't even know there was a Netflix
maybe
documentary.
you guys are Johnny Depp apologists,
Oh,
but
well, no. I mean, from my standpoint, it's like, I think that she got, I would say 98% of the hate online. Way more than he ever did. I would not date him, and I wouldn't date her. I think they both are victims and perpetrators. But I think that in terms of the online discussion, women just get raked through the coals way more than men.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's just like a standard across the board. I think we have a higher expectation of what women should be. I don't know if it's because women are mothers, and so there's a little bit of like I talk about with my true crime thing, like when Andrea Yates, I don't know if you remember this case back in the 90s when she drowned her children in the bathtub because, she was trying to protect them. Obviously she was insane, trying to protect them. God told them, to do this. I remember thinking like a mom's going to do this, like a mother. And that's probably on me for probably judging a mother more harshly than I would a father. But I think that probably has something to do with why she got the most hate. It's much easier to make to rip down a very, very attractive woman. But I'm just curious from your standpoint, because they were both victims and both perpetrators, I think, at the same time, and that can complicate things. So you should watch the doc, though.
Okay, I will.
She's like, I got homework. Got it.
Yeah, sorry. I just think it'd be interesting.
I just started rewatching Lost again, so I'm.
I love Lost.
Hard up for some stuff.
Evangeline Lilly can get it as well.
Well, Daryn, all right.
Sorry.
We got to put Daryn back in the house.
Gotta put her back in the cage.
You're back in the cage with Daryn. Well, last question here, and thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show with us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm sure our listeners are going to definitely check out Live to Tell. What are some new or like recent or upcoming stories that you're working on right now that you can share with us? What, by the time this comes out and people are going over and checking out your feed, what's coming up?
By the time this comes out on Sunday.
On Sunday, yes, only a few days away. Yes.
Yes,
just go with it, Caitlin. Come on,
yes,
we're doing
Caitlin,
show business.
Solid half the week left.
I feel like, well, nothing's gonna happen for my show in between now and then.
That's fair, but come, in case it's like played later on. I'm just teasing.
So the next episode, what is that domestic violence episode that we were talking about before? Her name is Melissa, and she eventually he kidnaps her, and there's a lot of violence.
Oh God.
But she's also an inspiration, and she went back to school after, and it's one of my favorite episodes overall.
Oh, okay. That's a good tease.
Not that I have favorites. They're all my precious children.
Sure. Yeah, I was going to say
they're all God's children, but you have your favorites. Here we go. Okay.
I make the joke on the show, Caitlin, that, well, we all do, that I'm mother and Daryn is father, but I feel like you are like the mother of so many people in the sense of all these people being your
matriarch of
children.
the matriarch.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Like I'll be like a fun aunt.
Yeah, that's a good way.
I don't want to take mother away.
That's fine. Yeah, that's true. You can be Aunt Caitlin here on the show.
She's a shitty mom, Caitlin. He's a shitty mom.
Yeah, I'm terrible. But continue. I think you had others to mention.
Yeah, and then I don't know when this will come out, but I'm working on actually a couple episodes of people who have been shot in the head.
Oh my goodness.
Mary Jo Buttafuoco.
Yeah.
We know her.
It's not her, but
but that's
I don't want to make a promise.
Yeah.
But people like that.
Her specifically. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
And then Joe Lozito, who on the subway, this man came up and like stabbed him a bunch of times, and there were cops in the motorman's car that was like right next to him. And they saw what was happening, did nothing until Joe stopped the stabby man by himself. And then they came out.
Oh my goodness. Where was this?
Serve and protect.
New York. Yep.
To serve and protect.
Well, they don't have that on their cars anymore.
Yeah, no shit.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Now they have like that CPR thing or something, whatever it says. It's
community.
Community courage and
something.
It's like thoughts and prayers, like there's nothing really substantial.
Yeah, it's like we can do anything together, just
you
not
teach a
with
man
us.
to fish. You teach a man to fish.
Yeah, but
just random slogans.
He tried to sue the police department, but apparently
I have a feeling that didn't go over well. I imagine
the
police.
Well, constitutionally they have no special duty to protect you.
Oh.
Qualified immunity makes it super easy for cops to just get away with a lot of stuff in this country. I will say that. I'm very anti-qualified immunity. So
yes. And I will say Joe is very I don't hate all cops.
Yeah.
Right.
He doesn't like to judge a whole group
of
people based on a couple people, but those ones in particular were pretty bad.
That's pretty tough. Yes.
Yeah, those people. There are obviously good people. I'm not an ACAB person where all cops are bastards. I do think if you want to be a cop, for the most part, people do want to do good and they want to help their community. So we just need to see a little bit more of that. But
Caitlin also, Kat's on the other hand, Caitlin is not.
Are all God's children.
Yeah. Well,
and are all perfect.
I don't know if Caitlin agrees.
I had cats growing up and they were not the best creatures. So I feel like
that feels like a you problem to me.
Would you?
To me.
Just saying.
But Caitlin,
my doggies were little sweethearts.
Well, my cat has never hissed. Would you pet him?
Yeah.
Well,
okay, great. Come over.
I would pet a cat. If one is presented to me, I'm not going to be mean.
By the way, I love that this is where the conversation has, of course.
But I also love that she said it needs to be presented to her as if it's like an act of tribute. I need to be rolled out on the red gown. Right. I'm like, okay, all right, bitch, whatever.
Hey, should be wearing a cape and a crown.
That can also be arranged. Absolutely. Well, Caitlin, thank you so much for coming on the show.
So nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for doing the Lord's work here, because those are conversations to talk to someone at their worst day, maybe their worst day. Maybe it's their best day. I don't know. Maybe worst and best can kind of be the same thing. But to talk to someone on a really difficult day, I think takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength and a lot of nuance that a lot of people do not have. So we're lucky to get you on this podcast and to hear those stories. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
And tell everybody where they can find you on socials and in the podcasting world and anywhere else that you exist.
Not at a cat cafe, I'll tell you that much right now. You don't be finding this bitch there. Nope.
Probably not.
Not.
I do. You know how they do the puppy yoga? Why don't they let's eliminate the yoga part? Let's just
do a puppy
Where can I just hang out with the puppies? A cat can be there.
Okay.
Gee, what a sweetheart.
Caitlin's has a business plan for.
I know. She's like, here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So social media, at Live to Tell pod, at Live to Tell pod, at the podcast. Hang on, Live to Tell podcast. I knew it was wrong. I don't even know.
I do that all the time. I'm like, is it and disturbed or is it ampersand? And John's like, it's been the same thing for the past 5.5 years. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, Caitlin gets away with this. This is a new show for her. Okay, guys? Daryn has no excuse.
Yeah.
At Live to Tell podcast on Instagram and TikTok, but listen.
I'm not a TikTok person, so don't feel shame. Don't feel shame.
Need a social media person? I'm available.
Yeah, do you want to do it?
Yeah, let's talk after the show.
Yeah, I'm 36. I don't know how to TikTok. I don't know how it works.
Same age, but don't know.
Listen, I'm older and I do know, and I'm willing to help you both. So let's talk after the show. We'll get you on TikTok. You'll be doing trending dances in no time. It'll be wonderful. Caitlin for those listening, Caitlin just frowned.
So she really did not look good at that.
No, she was not happy with that.
Live to Tell pod at gmail.com if you want to email me.
That's right.
My social, Caitlin Van Mol, Caitlin Vanmol. Irish spelling of Caitlin, and then I'm just Belgian, so that's Van Mol.
The best beer. So
I don't drink beer.
What is wrong with you? Why am I with this person?
Lots
no
of
cats, no beer. What's going on
here.
with this?
No.
I've
so
turned
sorry.
now. I've turned.
Being
just so
such a brat.
But just so everybody knows, we will link to all of Caitlin's socials and links in our show notes. So if you're interested, check out the show notes on our show, or if you're watching on YouTube, they're down below in the description as well. And yeah, thanks again, Caitlin, and thanks everyone for listening and watching.
We love you, Caitlin. Thank you so much. Despite all your flaws, we still like you, and we'll have you back.
I'm not perfect. I never pretended to be.
That's okay. You have to come back and let us know about the white whale once you get that squared away in one way or another. I
definitely will.
Right. Follow us on Patreon, subscribe on YouTube, and you can see our pretty faces as well as Caitlin's. I'm just gonna say it. It's a pretty face. What are you gonna do? You know, we don't say this to every guest, Caitlin. We don't say that to every guest. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's right.
Even this lighting is so inconsistent.
No, you're
You're the best and worst looking guest we've ever had, Caitlin. You're the best and the worst.
Oh, great! I'll take it.
Yeah, just know that.
All right. Thanks, Caitlin, and thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.